This is Pre-Calculus Lesson 1-1. I'm sorry that I couldn't be there, especially on our first day of actually doing our normal math. Riley's sick and I gotta stay home for him. So I'm currently recording this at 2:36 in the morning, so that's why I am whispering and why I make any errors. That's my excuse, right? So our unit guide is on Google Classroom. That's what we're looking at. It's kind of a big unit, but I think a lot of this is review. I think I remember doing a lot of this in Algebra 2. So yeah, today is the imaginary unit, which means we have 2 homework assignments on Khan Academy after we're done. And Khan Academy now looks like this. Make sure that you're updating your percent on your unit guide, just like before. Everything is very similar to last year, with one exception, and that is the summary, or what to do at the very end of your notes. But let's go and actually do those notes and get it out of the way. This should be theoretically a review lesson. We'll see what's going on. All right. Our objective today is to find what I raised to a power is, and to simplify negative square roots using I, or with I. So what is the definition of I? You should know this. Pause the video now. What is I? If you said the square root of -1, you are 100% correct. That is indeed I. That's it. I know that a lot of other people say that I is, or they define I by saying I squared is equal to -1. That's another way of defining it. I think this is a little bit more straightforward. It's the square root of -1. So my question for you is, what is I squared? And then you're laughing because you're like, haha, Mr. Sindel, you just wrote it. And that is indeed correct. If you want to do it a different way, you could say it's the square root of -1. That's I, and then you need to square it. And of course, when you square a square root, the square root and square cancel out, and you're left with just -1. That's another way to think about it. Cool, cool. Now the harder question is, what is I to the power of 3? This one I do want you to be thinking about. Pause the video now. What is I to the power of 3? Go. All right, you've unpaused the video because you are frustrated and you can't get it, or because you got it and you want to check your work. So the easiest way to think about I to the power of 3 is using the power rule. So I to the power of 3 is the same thing as I to the power of 2 times I to the power of 1. Because when I multiply similar bases, I'm adding their exponents. This is 2 plus 1, which is 3. Well, we know what I squared is. I squared is -1, so this is equal to -1 times I to the power of 1, which is just I. Well, -1 times I is -I. All right. And finally, I to the power of 4. What is that? Pause the video again. Figure this out using this same method. All right, so I hope that you have attempted this problem and you're not just continuing the video without pausing, because that would make me very unhappy. This should be I to the power of 2 times I to the power of 2. Of course, you could have done it another way, but I to the power of 2 is -1, so it's -1 times -1. Negative times a negative is a positive, and that is equal to 1. All right, what I want to start doing here is filling in this table to figure out the pattern, and if you already remember the pattern, then you're way ahead of the game. So if I have I to the power of 1, that's just I. If I have I to the power of 2, I'm just filling in for the table. We had -1, then we got -I, then we have 1. What is anything to the power of 0, including I? Anything to the power of 0 is, if you said 0, my heart just broke. You should have said 1. All right, and then you should notice that it's going to start repeating the pattern. 1, I, -1, -I. 1, yep, you're right. I, just repeating the pattern. -1, -I, and then it goes back to 1. All right. So now we need to figure out a way to do problems like example 1. What is I to the power of 81? Very similar to our warm-up from, I think, Friday. How do we do big exponents? Well, the trick is looking at the remainder. This repeats every 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it goes back to itself. So I need to somehow divide by 4 and then figure out what the remainder is. So I'm going to make this note here. We are dividing here by 4. The rationale is because it repeats every 4. So 0 divided by 4, the remainder is 1. I don't know why I said 1. It's 0. I'm going to blame tiredness. 1 divided by 4, the remainder is 1, 2, 3, but when I do 4 divided by 4, the remainder is now back to 0. Then it goes 1, 2, 3, and then back to 0. 8 divided by 4 has a remainder of 0. So look at the remainder, and that will tell you what you're going to do. If I have a remainder of 0, that goes to 1, because 0 goes to 1. So take the exponent, 81. We're going to divide that by 4. Well, 81 divided by 4, that's going to be 20 remainder 1. And if you can't do that in your head, that's okay. You have plenty of time, but you may not use a calculator. I repeat, do not use a calculator. So if I have remainder 1 says I have I, so this thing is equal to I. So on the quiz, on the test, you are not going to have notes unless you have that power, of course. Wait, this is pre-calculus. You don't have powers. You just don't get notes. It's harder. Sorry. What you will have to do is basically recreate this in your head. It goes I, then -1, then -I, then 1. A good way to think about it is it flip-flops between 1 and I, and it starts out both positive, then both negative. If you can just remember that, and then, of course, the little remainder trick, you should be good. All right, so let's do 123. So again, I do 123. I divide that by 4. That has a remainder of 3, so it's going to be 30 remainder 3. Well, remainder 3 means I have -I. Negative I. And that could have been bigger. There it is. Okay, so now you know how to do those problems. As long as you can do division, it might take a little bit long, but that's okay. All right, that's the first half of our objective. I raised to a power. The second part of our objective is to simplify negative square roots using I. So, as a bit of review, how do you simplify square root of 20? Well, you make a factor tree. I should have given you more time to think about that, but I apologize. Okay, what times what is 20? And I'm going to forget the square root for now. I'm just going to do only 20. Well, 20 is 4 times 5. And if you know that 4 is perfect square, you can stop there. So there's two strategies. Do it with perfect squares and know it, or just keep factoring and factoring and factoring. So I'm just going to keep factoring and factoring and factoring. And whenever I get my my factors, I'm going to stop. And things that are paired up, I'm going to circle, and I'm going to link them, I guess. So this is going to be equal to, whenever they're linked up, they can pop to the outside. It's because of this rule, this is really equal to the square root of 4 times the square root of 5. And since the square root of 4 is 2, this is 2 square root of 5. In another way, you could say that the 2's were linked up. Anything that links up comes to the outside. So these 2 came to the outside, and anything that wasn't linked up stays on the inside. A few different ways to think about it, but I think everyone can probably get here. So try it again. Go ahead and pause the video. See if you know how to do square root of 45 using the factor tree. All right, so you've unpaused the video now. 45 is 9 times 5. Just one way. You could have done it 3 times 15. 9 is 3 and 3. Those pair up, and I can see this is the square root of 9 times the square root of 5, and the square root of 9 is 3, so this is equal to 3 square root of 5. Or you could have said, well, the 3's link up, and that's why they're on the outside. And then the 5 doesn't link up, so it stays on the inside. Okay, so that's our review. This is, still kind of review too. I think we've done this before, but maybe just briefly. So what do I do now when I have a negative on the inside? Well, it's still square root of 4 times square root of 5, but you have this addition. So it's the square root of 4. This is equal to the square root of 4 times the square root of 5 times the square root of -1. I want you to pause, not necessarily the video, but just think about this. Square root of 4 times square root of 5, just like before, but also square root of -1, because when you multiply these all together, you get -20, and the rules of radicals stay that you can still have that radical when you're done. So I think we can all agree that this fact is true, but this is the cool thing, square root of -1. What is the square root of -1? That's I. This thing now turns into the same thing before, 2 square root of 5, but with an I. And then whenever you don't have things in square roots, you put it up front. So this thing is now equal to 2 square root of 5, but with an I because of this square root of 1, or square root of -1. So go ahead, pause the video, literally hit stop right now, do this one. All right, you've unpaused the video. This is equal to the square root of 9 times the square root of 5 times the square root of -1, which means we have 3i square root of 5. You are expected to do these types of problems for homework. Here's some more practice, 2 more. Pause the video now, do example 2. All right, you've unpaused the video, so I'm going to make my factor tree for 72. The general shortcut is if you have a negative under the square root, just pop out an I and then treat it like a positive square root problem. So 72, I think that's going to be 2 times 36. And oh, I know 36 is a perfect square, but I can go ahead and do this as well. 6 times 6, those are the pair. So this is equal to the square root of 2 times the square root of 36 times the square root of -1. You don't have to show all of this work. If you just want to jump straight to the answer, you can say, well, I know that this is going to turn into a 6, so it's going to be 6i, 6 and I, then square root of 2. All right, again, pause the video, do example 3 if you have not done so already. All right, you've unpaused the video now. So when you made a factor tree, weird things happen. 3 and 11, both of these can't pair up, but you can pull out that negative. So this answer is actually I times the square root of 33. But you can't do anything with the radical, leave it, and then just pop out that I, and that is all you can do. All right, that concludes the notes. The end of the notes for this year is going to be a little bit different. Do not, I repeat, do not do the summary in class. You will be doing a summary, but it is always going to be left for homework. You may never, ever do the summary in class. So you might be wondering why Mr. Sindel said, do not do the summary, and here is the reason. It's called the rate of forgetting. You will get this handout when I come back. So let's pretend we did the notes. So we are right here. We just did the notes, we're on this line. So after 18 minutes, we've already forgotten half of the stuff that I just taught. Within 1 day, I'm down here to 42, 43%. Within 7 days, I'm down here to like 35-ish%. That's only doing the notes. But what happens if within 18 minutes, I do some review like Khan Academy? Then I jump back up here to this line. So if I do notes and then Khan Academy, then I stay on this line. And within 1 day, I've remembered 70%. Within 7 days, I've remembered 60%. So that's reviewing twice. I'm on this curve. But if I do review 3 times, then I'm on this curve. Then this review may be doing the summary or Cornelling my notes. Then I'll be on this line. This line means that within 7 days, I'll remember 80%. You're shooting for B here. And then you're stay on this line. But what if I review again? What if Mr. Sindel, for example, gives me a quiz or gives me a test or makes me do flashcards on Quizlet? All of this constant review with time to forget in between will get you on these higher curves so you can't forget as much. Notice that when you're on these curves that are the 1 to 3rd time reviewing out here, this curve right here, you never really go below 80%. You can't really get a C if you review that 3rd time correctly. So that is the curve of forgetting, the rate of forgetting, which is make sure you have time to forget and then review. Time to forget and then review. All right, that concludes today's lesson. So what you're doing right now, just as a review, is you're going to Khan Academy and you're doing these lessons as you get the 100%, you're going back to your unit guide and entering if you got 100% or whatever. And again, don't type the percent, just the number. So you might be wondering why Mr. Sindel said, do not do the summary, and here is the reason. It's called the rate of forgetting. You will get this handout when I come back. So let's pretend we did the notes. So we are right here. We just did the notes, we're on this line. So after 18 minutes, we've already forgotten half of the stuff that I just taught. Within one day, I'm down here to 42, 43%. Within 7 days, I'm down here to like 35-ish%. That's only doing the notes. But what happens if within 18 minutes I do some review like Khan Academy? Then I jump back up here to this line. So if I do notes and then Khan Academy, then I stay on this line. And within one day, I've remembered 70%. Within 7 days, I've remembered 60%. So that's reviewing twice. I'm on this curve. But if I do review 3 times, then I'm on this curve. Then this review may be doing the summary or Cornelling my notes. Then I'll be on this line. This line means that within 7 days, I'll remember 80%. You're shooting for B here. And then you stay on this line. But what if I review again? What if Mr. Sindel, for example, gives me a quiz or gives me a test or makes me do flashcards on Quizlet? All of this constant review with time to forget in between will get you on these higher curves so you can't forget as much. Notice that when you're on these curves that are the 1 to 3rd time reviewing out here, this curve right here, you never really go below 80%. You can't really get a C if you review that 3rd time correctly. So that is the curve of forgetting, the rate of forgetting, which is make sure you have time to forget and then review. Time to forget and then review. All right, that concludes today's lesson. So what you're doing right now, just as a review, is you're going to Khan Academy and you're doing these lessons as you get the 100%, you're going back to your unit guide and entering if you got 100% or whatever. And again, don't type the percent, just the number.